I'm Kelli Clare, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kelli Clare.
Be sure to go over to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. There's handy links in the sidebar where you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on your phone, on your computer, wherever you do it. You can find links there. You also find us on YouTube. There's a link in the sidebar as well. I'd like to thank some sponsors who faithfully support the show and allow us to do what we do. George Kramer and his new book, Blind to Blood. Ben Bergstall had a unique job. He was a tissue procurement specialist. When someone died, he would surgically remove people's body parts for donation. He really enjoyed doing it. So much so, when an anonymous email asked him to consider recovering people's body parts on the side, he was more than happy to oblige. The trouble was Ben sought out live people to fulfill his clandestine clients' needs. Read all about Ben's exploits in this riveting book that delves into tissue procurement, Blind to Blood by George Kramer. Pick up your copy today on Amazon and find out why people are saying this is an intense page-turner, that they are also fascinated by digging into the mind of Ben and finding out how he works. If you would like to see a look into the darker side of humanity, pick up Blind to Blood, the riveting new page-turner by George Kramer. Also, I'd like to thank Richard Thomas for sponsoring the show. Richard has an online fiction writers course, the University of Richard. And there's a link in the show notes. There's a banner there where you can click on and you can see the course guide. Lots and lots of classes coming up. He can help teach you to be the best writer you can be. There's classes coming up for the 2018 and 2019 season, like short story mechanics, writing flash fiction, contemporary dark fiction, advanced creative writing workshops, how to write a novel in a year, lots and lots of stuff from a very prolific and excellent writer, Richard Thomas, teaching you how to be the best writer you can be. It's the University of Richard. There's a link in the show notes. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from our good friend Richard Gleaves. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kelli Clare on the show with me. Kelli has a brand new book. It came out yesterday, so you can go grab your copy of it right now. It's called Hidden, and I think you're going to love it. Welcome to the show, Kelli.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me. We begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I love this question. For me, it goes all the way back to my very young years when I spent summers at my grandmother's house while my parents were working. I was enamored with her reading. She sat at her dining room table with her coffee and just read book after book after book every day. And I was just in awe. I thought, what is she doing? What world is she in? And so I wanted to sample that world and see what it was like. So one day I snuck into one of her big boxes of books, and I took out a Janet Daly book. And mind you, I was probably only about 11, so it wasn't an appropriate book for an 11-year-old. But nonetheless, I stole off with that book, and I ran off and I read it, and I realized where she was at, what world she was in when she was in these novels, and I realized that's where I wanted to be too. Now, she caught me I had finished the book though, but she caught me, and she sort of redirected me to Laura Ingalls Wilder and the Nancy Drew mysteries and things like that were more age appropriate for me. But that's really when my love of reading came to fruition. I've always been a storyteller, because the same summers that I spent with my grandmother watching her read, I also spent out on her front porch steps telling stories, made up stories, big adventures that just came from nowhere out of my head to the other children in the neighborhood. And man, I could go on for days with that kind of thing. So I've always had the storytelling thing in my head, and there's always been stuff in there. So, I just finally decided to take the plunge and put it out there for the world.
I have a similar experience with my grandmother. I would spend a lot of time with my grandparents, on my mother's side, at their house in the summers, and my grandmother she was a retired nurse, and every afternoon she would go to her bedroom where she had a reading chair, and for 2 or 3 hours she would sit there and read, and she was not to be disturbed by anybody for any reason. You did not.
I love that.
Yeah, you did not disturb Nana, and she had a sister that lived about an hour and a half away from where we did, and they would go down about once a month and go visit her sister, and she would take a paper bag, back when grocery stores had paper bags, and it would be filled with books, and her sister did the same thing, and they would swap books, and kind of the same thing. I got to rummaging around in her books one day, and she said, well, let me get some things that you would like. And so both of my grandparents grew up in the Depression, and while they made good money, you couldn't look at them and tell it. A lot of people from that era really hoarded money because the fear is always there that something's going to happen again. But one thing that they were very liberal with is they would spend money on books. And so every time I went, she would buy me any book I wanted. So I love that we have that grandmother connection there. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool.
When you were in school, did that affect what you studied, and did that stay with you? That thought that one day I'm going to be a writer.
It kind of did not.
That happens to a lot of people.
It kind of did not. I can say that my teachers and instructors, even back in high school, used to enjoy my essays and things quite a bit, though I had to do a lot of rewrites because I'm a bit of a nonconformist, and I like to be outside of the lines. So I had to do a lot of rewrites with my essays, although my teachers and instructors, always said, this is a great story, we love this, but... and then I went on to, after, high school, I went on to study business management, rolled that into human resource development, and my career went in that direction. And I always worked in human resource development and such. So I was a human resource exec until about 10 years ago. And I quit working at that point when I had my daughter, and then things began to change for me. Then I began to gain the mindset that, hey, I want to write. That's what I want to do, and I with my daughter growing up and my encouraging her to follow her dreams and to be who she wants to be. I thought one day to myself, I need to walk the walk. I need to show her that I'm doing that as well. So that's when I decided to throw my hat in the ring and to really start writing So I haven't been doing writing for but about 6 years.
Nice. When I was reading some about you in kind of getting ready for the show yesterday, I think it was your Amazon page, and I was reading through your bio, and my browser window, I had it small, so the text wrapped funny, and I read, where was it? Let's see. Kelli Clare is a former human, and then the text wrapped to the next line. And I was like, well, this is going to be an interesting story, but then it was, human resource, executive. I love to hear people's stories about how they got to where they are, because a lot of writers take a circuitous route to get there, and very few people, seek an education in writing and that is their sole focus. Most of us go out and work, 3 or 4 different careers and collect all these weird life experiences that no one ever thinks is going to benefit a writer. But I don't think there's any wasted education or experience about life that is lost on a writer. How do you feel like working in human resources maybe helped you as a writer, or maybe helped you to observe human behavior and the human condition?
Yeah, definitely. It did that for me. Working in that field, you're so hands-on with the human capital or the people. And whether it's,
human capital is such a weird word, isn't it?
Yeah, human capital. Yeah. So, that's the corporate world coming back to me.
Right.
Yeah. So, interacting, whether it be through training or maybe even disciplinary action, or trying to resolve issues with unions, you get to sit with many different people from all different places in life and hear their stories. And again, we go back to the storytelling and just picking up bits and pieces of who these people were in my past. I'm absolutely sure that influences my writing now.
Yeah, I'm sure. When you took the time off when your daughter was born, well, first off, when you're working your executive career and all of that, a lot of times we get caught up in the day-to-day stuff, that a love of reading is one of the first things that gets trimmed out when you're trying to find enough hours in every day. And then, when we have a shift in life, a lot of times that's one of the things that comes back. Was that true for you? Did you kind of discover a passion for reading again when you were able to take off when you had your daughter?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. When you're busy with an executive career out in the corporate America and stuff, everything falls by the wayside, and then what you have left, obviously goes to your family. So you lose that opportunity, that time to delve into all of the books and stories that you once did, and that it's no different for me. So absolutely, when I stopped working once my daughter was born, that's exactly what happened to me. Was I got to put my nose back into all the books and reread things that I loved, old classics and such, and then discover so many new authors and stories. And I read quite widely, to be quite honest with you. So I love Gillian Flynn and Lisa Unger, Ruth Ware, Stephen King, and you can kind of feel there's a dark theme there. I like reading dark things. But at the same time, I love to read books written by historians, historical biographies. 2 of my favorites right now are Dan Jones and Alison Weir. And, of course, I go back and read Jane Austen's books over and over. And it gave me an opportunity to catch up and to get back into the world that I once lived in and loved. And I've been there ever since. I read every single night even when I'm writing, I have to read every night.
Yeah, me too. And I think reading widely is super important. You know, I think a lot of people might think that if someone is writing thrillers or romance or, you know, science fiction, that you need to read only that so that you can understand how that genre works. And I'm the complete opposite. I think you need to read all genres so that you can bring something unique and fresh to the genre that you write in.
I agree 100%. I think that we should all read widely and experience many different genres and methodologies of all the great authors out there today. And I think I write that way too, which is why my debut is kind of a cross-genre book. And I just don't feel like I want to read in one box, and I feel like I don't want to write in one box.
Well, life is kind of cross-genre. You know, we don't we don't live 24/7 in, you know, in a political thriller or you know, or in a space fantasy. You know, we dip in and out of all sorts of things because we're humans.
Right, exactly.
So you said you've been writing for about 6 years. What was the first thing that you decided to, that first story idea that you decided to pursue?
I first started when I got back into the writing. I started by blogging, and that was at the time when, at the height, I believe, of all the mom blogging. And as I continued through that phase, it was quite notable that my blog posts were actually mini stories. And I realized, hey, you know, I just really need to jump into that first novel. And not that it was a waste of time. I mean, I won some awards and I did some really fun things with the blogging in those years, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I needed to jump right in to it. And I just kind of played around with a few ideas, but what really came to me was these characters that are found in Hidden. And this will sound very trite, but I promise you it is true. I had a dream about these two characters. I didn't know who they were or what their story was at the time. I just had this one scene with these two people that came to me that way, and I knew I had to do something with it because they wouldn't leave me alone. And that, you know, some people will say, well, you know, writers are crazy, they hear all this stuff in their head or whatever. Well, it's kind of true, I guess, because these characters did that to me. They wouldn't leave me alone. So I had a lot of fun exploring that then afterward to really kind of reveal who these characters were, where they came from, what their story was. And it was just a lot of great fun. That piece, that dream that I had actually became the first scene that I wrote in the book, which is all the way into the center of the book at chapter 15. So my writing, as I mentioned earlier, I think that I'm pretty much a nonconformist, so I write that way too. I wrote from chapter 15 forward, and then I went back and wrote backwards from chapter 15, and that's how I put Hidden together. It works for me. I know it doesn't always work for others, but that style works for me, and it's a total pantsing style. I tried outlines and I threw them all away in fits of frustration. But that's how it came. That's how Hidden came to me. And it, you know, again, I know I said it sounds trite, but it's actually true. It came through a dream.
Well, you're not the only one. Diana Gabaldon, the author of the Outlander series, was on the show a while back, and she said that she completely writes out of order. If a scene comes to her, in a dream or, in some random way. She writes that entire scene, and then she collects these scenes and then figures out how they go together. And, that makes me get a little twitchy, because I'm a pretty linear writer. But I also find myself that when I have a good idea that comes, what you realize is that those good ideas come, and if you don't get somewhere and write those down, and you may not completely flesh out the scene, but if you don't find a way to grab a hold of that, you will lose it. Especially when you have families that you're raising, and you get a little older, and you have to grab a hold of those when they fly by. I want to take a pause from the show for just a moment to tell you about a sponsor. As a writer, your editor is often the first and last eyes on your work. The best editors are trusted collaborators, bringing your story to life in a way you didn't know was possible. Marlowe Moss will take your writing to a new level and your career to new heights, ensuring that readers not only buy your book, but also love reading it too. One top editor calls Marlowe Moss a talented author in his own right and as skilled an editor as I've seen. I use his skills myself. One of his authors says, "I had no idea my writing could be this good. Tension, POV, or timeline issues, plot and pacing, Marlowe does it all, and for the price of a copy edit." Your hard work deserves a better editor, and Marlowe Moss is the editing partner you've been looking for at a price you can afford. Offering developmental and copy editing as well as beta and proofreaders, visit marlowemoss.net for more information and a free sample edit. That's MarloweMoss.net. And let me tell you, I have used Marlowe Moss. He has edited a story for me, and the comments that I got back were eye-opening. As a writer and as someone who spends time with words as much as I do, you tend to gloss over things. You just completely lose them because you're so involved in creating, and you need to step away and let someone else put their eyes on it and help you see the things that you can't see for yourself. Marlowe Moss is amazing. MarloweMoss.net.
I agree. I carry a notebook with me in my car and everywhere I go, and things just hit you, as you say, and you have to be able to get something down on paper quickly, and then obviously you can elaborate and work into it later, but you're right. And that's what I do too, is I have that notebook with me at all times, and people constantly see me just jotting down a note here or there and like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, there's something in my head and I need to get it on a piece of paper right now.
Right. So tell us about Hidden. What's the book about, and who were these characters that came to you?
Well, Hidden is a bit of a cross-genre book because I like everything. I read widely and I like everything. So I wanted everything in this book. So it's a romantic thriller. And what the premise of the story is this. I took a piece of 15th century English history, I gave it a little twist, and then I pulled it into what I thought it might look like today. And then that became the foundation of a very intense love story. That piece of English history that I'm referring to is the Cousins' War, or sometimes I think it's better known as the Wars of the Roses. And I'm just really enthralled by that era of English history. And so I needed to use it somehow. So these characters became the modern day Plantagenets. They didn't know it, but that's where I went with it. And so that's the basic premise of it. The characters are totally of my own creation. And I know that I have been heavily influenced by several several authors out there today in the dark style, writing style maybe of Ruth Ware, whom I love and I Can't wait to get to her new book. I'm saving it for when I get moved. I'm in the process of moving so that I can sit with it and love the book. So if you maybe crossed that type of writing that you might find in The Woman in Cabin 10, blend it with a Sandra Brown novel with the high sexual tension, I think, then I think that might give you a good idea of where Hidden's at.
I think King Solomon famously said, "There's nothing new under the sun," and that's true. We there are these stories of the way people interact with each other and the way families work and the way romantic relationships work, and we find new ways to tell those stories over and over again that stay relevant and that intrigue us. I think George R.R. Martin said that Game of Thrones is loosely based on the Wars of the Roses as well, and I think your interpretation of that, or your take on that, is vastly different than his, and that's what I love about writers, is we can take a bit of inspiration from something real or imagined, and when we sit down with it and our characters take on those situations or whatever, it becomes something completely brand new.
Yes, I agree. I love George Martin and I love Game of Thrones. It's one of my favorites right now, and you're right. I mean, he did seemingly loosely base it on the Wars of the Roses, and it has a totally different feel than what I've done in Hidden. And Hidden is a present day novel, so it's quite different.
Right.
Quite different.
So what was the first scene that came to you? I think you said you started out of order. What was the first thing that came to you that you knew, oh, okay, this is the story?
Yeah, the first scene actually came to me in that dream, and what I saw was these two people who were very intense in a dark space, a dark attic space. I saw there was a window, and there was a moon and clouds floating around the moon, and it had this very vivid picture. And I knew that something bad had just happened, and I knew that the man was British, but I didn't know anything else. So I took that imagery from my head, and that became the first scene in the 15th chapter, which is the very emotional, very intense scene. And I'm not going to go into it because I really don't want to spoil it. It's my favorite, and I just want people to get to it and hopefully love it. But that was where this book started, and that was the first scene that I wrote, was from that image that I had in that dream. And so I really had to develop these characters and find out who they were and why they came to me. And quite honestly, I think I mentioned, I'm a pantser. So I kind of let my characters lead me a little bit. I always have a good idea where I'm going with my story, though I don't outline or plan it out per se. But, my characters kind of reveal themselves and lead me through it a bit. And I allowed Ellie and Will to do that in this book too. So they're leading me through 2 more books, by the way. So I just wanted to get that in there. But that's where it all began. And like I said, that's in the first scene in chapter 15. And I can't wait for people to read it because I hope they love it as much as I loved writing it. It's really intense and really, really cool, I think.
Absolutely. My friend Chuck Manley says that he is a pantser with a purpose, and I really love that he has a general idea of where the story's going and kind of some road markers along the way, but then he lets his characters just go nuts, in between there. And I like that. I think a lot of writers are like that. We kind of know where the story's going, but then hold it loosely enough to allow the characters to be themselves.
Right. Yes. I agree 100%. That's exactly how I write.
You said earlier that you started as a blogger in your writing. Are you still blogging, by the way?
No, I haven't blogged for probably about 6 years. So I kind of put that all to the side. I knew that was something I didn't really want to do.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of all went by the wayside. And I let it go. And even on my author website right now, I don't blog anymore. I just don't feel like it's where I want to put my energy. I would rather be in this fictional world right now that I'm creating and stay there.
Sure. But that was a formative experience for you, wasn't it? To realize that the things you were doing could be something else if you redirected those energies.
Absolutely, it was very formative as I continued through that process, learning to blog and learning about the blogosphere, I guess. My posts became many stories, and I knew then, I'm like, this is me needing to write a book. This is not me desiring to blog. This is coming out, and in the formation of my posts were, hey, we need to be a book kind of thing. So it was a great experience. It was a formative experience, and I appreciate all the support that I had at that point. I worked exclusively for a while with actress Felicity Huffman, helping get her women's website going, and was one of her original contributing writers. And it was a fantastic experience. But again, I just knew that there was something more that I wanted to do with my writing ability, and so I just kind of moved through it and started to work myself into some writing workshops with Writer's Digest, and then just kind of took off from there through networking with authors and other people in the publishing industry, and finally, decided to make that leap.
And when you finished the book, how did you go about getting it published?
I actually did not do the normal traditional route that most new writers do. And by that, I mean querying for an agent and stuff. I didn't go that route. And I'll tell you why. I'm published with Spark Press, which is a small indie press. And they're the sister press of She Writes Press. I think probably more people have heard of She Writes Press. So it's a hybrid publisher. But the reason why I decided to go that route was because when I began this journey, I had and still do have a very strong desire to learn the workings of the industry firsthand. I'm a hands-on person, so I wanted to do everything. I wanted to learn it all, and I wanted to be a part of it, and I wanted to maintain the creative rights for my story. So going this route, I've been able to maintain creative control. So my story is my story. I've worked with editors. I've worked with a developmental editor. I've worked with the thriller writing instructor, and then the publisher's copy editors and such. But still, my story hasn't been forcibly reworked by editors. It remains mine. And I think that was, for my first book, that was my goal. That's the reason why I chose Spark Press, and it's a wonderful organization, by the way. I don't know if I'll continue down that path or look into some traditional avenues or not. I haven't made that decision yet, but I'm having a fantastic experience, really hands-on with Spark Press, learning the industry, and I love it. So I may query agents in the future. I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet.
Well, what I love about the the time that we're in, Kelly, is that authors are empowered for maybe the first time ever, or maybe since the printing press, that authors have choices. There are lots of people doing fantastic stuff in the indie space. There are people that, still, are going the traditional route and that works for them. And then there are people, there are lots of small presses and for the first time, authors really have choices. And I love that about the time that we're in. And I love that you had a way, to get your book out and to learn everything that you wanted to learn and to be hands-on. I think every author needs to be, hands-on and learn how to do it. Even if they decide to go traditional, I think you need to know how the industry works.
I agree too. It's been a great education, and I have no regrets. I would do it all over again. Truly.
Absolutely. Well, Kelly, the new book is out now. We're going to send everybody to go pick it up. It's called Hidden, and it's got some great reviews already on Amazon, and we're looking forward to seeing how awesome this book does. Where can people find you online if they'd like to follow along with your career? I know you said that you've got 2 more books in the trilogy coming up, so we definitely want to keep that on our radar. Where can people find you?
My website is the easiest way to get all of the links to my social media. It's kelliclare.com, and Kelly is with an I, so Kelli, Clare, Clare.com. All of my social media links are there. I'm active on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I love to chat and interact. So if anybody follows and sends me a message or tweets me or anything, I will totally respond and chat willingly. And the book is available just about anywhere. You buy books: Amazon, iTunes, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound. So you can get it at most of your independent bookstores. Google, Kobo. I also put together an audiobook, which I want to plug because it's awesome. And the narrator is so amazing. And that's available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon as well.
Excellent. I'll put links to all that in the show notes. Kelly, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you. I'm so honored that you had me today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
His body broke free of its paralysis, and he stumbled forward, losing his balance. He fell down the slope towards the spot where they had been. His hand shot out unthinkingly, and he grabbed the corner of the black stone bridge. Hoofbeats. Pounding hoofbeats. Coming closer. Coming up the road. Someone or something galloped towards him. The head of an emaciated horse burst from the gloom of the road. The rider was fumbling, out of control, without saddle or bridle, clutching at the white mane, kicking the beast across the hindquarters with his thin legs, his face a frozen mask of terror. He whipped around to look back over his shoulder. Something chased him. Something terrible. Jason spun away as the horse ran over him, spearing him through the chest with its iron-shod hooves. He was unhurt. The horse galloped upward and across the bridge, across strong timbers, rough-hewn and knot-holed. The rider wheeled the horse about, looking back from the far shore. He was wheezing. A sloppy white ruffle bobbed under his chin. His face was hopeful now. A familiar face, much like the one Jason saw every morning in the mirror. Something thundered up behind Jason, not with a clatter of hoofbeats, but with the teeth-rattling thunder of stone on stone. Ichabod, yes, of course, the man was Ichabod, wailed, and the sound of his terror echoed across the valley. The hot breath of a horse burned the back of Jason's neck. He stood frozen, unable to turn his head to see the thing behind him. He didn't want to. This was no ordinary vision. He felt with certainty that the rider behind him, no, the horseman behind him, knew he was there. Ichabod kicked his horse. It reared, brayed, and would have thrown him but for the fistfuls of its mane he clutched. Horse and rider spun in place on the far side of the bridge, disoriented. The horseman behind Jason laughed, a terrible, deep, cracking sound from all directions like 1,000 axes chopping down the woods. Jason felt searing heat as a ball of flame whipped over his shoulder. A burning jack-o'-lantern arced across the bridge. Its maniacal face spun end over end. It grinned back at Jason for an instant, spun around and crashed into Ichabod's temple, knocking him from his horse and into the dust. The pumpkin careened upwards, exploding against the trees, shooting tendrils of flame up their trunks, igniting branches and showering the world with sparks and flaming leaves. Jason recoiled, fell to his knees, and threw his arms over his face. His lungs and heart pumped wildly. They slowed. He brought his arms down. The bridge was broken again. It was over.